Hello, good morning, everyone. Dear participants, on behalf of the experts in international trade at the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal, we welcome you to our webinar of the Desjardins International Meeting Series. And today's topic is really interesting, and I think a lot of you are eager to hear about it. It is life after pandemic and the new normal that awaits. Today we will learn where we will do, how life will change after COVID-19 and how it has impacted our world for good. Before we start, I would like to thank our partners for this event, starting with the Economic Development Agency of Canada for the regions of Quebec for its ongoing support of World Trade Center Montreal's activities, as well as our sponsor, Desjardins, who made this webinar series possible. So my name is Dina Mansour, and I am an advisor for international market development at the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal. And I have the honor to introduce our main speaker today, Bart Edesh, and animate a discussion along with him. Bart is a professor of practice at McGill University. He has 20 years working at the Asian Development Bank as the North America representative, and he is here today to share his insight as he works tracking trends and future paths for businesses and organizations across the world. Good morning, Bart.
Good morning, Dina.
So before we start, I just want to take a moment to say that this event will be entirely in English. Alors, je voulais prendre un moment pour vous dire que ce webinaire est entièrement en anglais. However, if you prefer asking your questions in French, I will be happy to translate for you your question. Alors, si jamais vous êtes plus à l'aise de poser votre question en français lors de la période des questions, vous pouvez le faire en français et il me fera plaisir de traduire votre question. So before we start, we'll invite you to just look at the platform. So we will leave 20 or 15 minutes question periods at the end, and we would like to hear from you. So if you do have some question, please write them in the designated Q&A box located on the bottom center of your screen, and we will address them towards the end. I also want to notify that you currently have a survey, an ongoing survey that we strongly encourage you to please fill up. It will be highly appreciated as it will help us to compile our goals for the end of the year. So Bart, you now have the floor.
Merci, Dina. Et merci à la Chambre de commerce de Montréal métropolitain et Desjardins de m'avoir invité ce matin à partager des idées sur l'avenir avec des membres de la communauté d'affaires et des représentants gouvernementaux. Thank you, Dina, the Chamber and Desjardins, of course, for organizing this morning's program. Those of us based here in Montreal and elsewhere in the province of Quebec are increasingly getting back to doing things that we were doing 2 years ago in the before times prior to the pandemic. But south of the partially reopened border, the USA is again struggling with COVID as vaccination rates have plateaued. The US is now averaging 118,000 cases a day over the past 7 days, the most since January. Rates of hospitalization and deaths have almost doubled in the past 2 weeks, and more than 67,000 people are hospitalized in the US due to COVID. Now, the world's leading economies have seen their rapid recovery after easing COVID restrictions begin to run out of steam in the past month as a resurgence in the virus depressed consumer spending. There are signs that the recovery in the US and Japan is losing momentum, while parts of Europe have slowed as consumers remain reluctant to eat out, to visit attractions, and to shop outside the home as they did before the pandemic. Meanwhile, Asian economies are being battered by the surging Delta variant, particularly in South and Southeast Asia. Growth forecasts for China are being lowered, hurting prospects that China will play a hoped-for large role in reviving the global economy. Now, back to Quebec, nearly 2/5 of the total population, or 30% of those over the age of 12, are not fully vaccinated. Thus, the province is not completely out of the woods, despite the relaxation of restrictions and the enjoyment of warm summer weather. That said, the pressure to become vaccinated is rising, as evidenced by Premier Legault's announcement of a vaccine passport to enable access to specified indoor activities like restaurants and gyms. And in the coming weeks, we expect that students, including university students, will return to in-person classes. And as many of you know, the Chamber has launched a campaign in support of the return of workers to downtown offices. But even as we return to once familiar weekday settings, the upheaval of the past 17 months has altered the way that we will work, study, relax, and unwind, engage in the economy, and move around. COVID has been a major shock, but it is one that is intertwined with major forces that are transforming our world. Some of these forces, such as IT, scientific, and medical innovations, have accelerated since early 2020. In short, the pandemic has injected further uncertainty, complexity, and volatility into a world that's already in the midst of disruptive technological, social, scientific, political, and environmental changes. In a few minutes, Dina and I are going to talk about some shorter-term changes in our lives as the pandemic recedes. But let me start by flagging a few of the longer-term, big-picture trends that will leave us with a very different world in, say, 10 or 20 years. A few months ago, the United States National Intelligence Council, or NIC, released a report exploring global trends to the year 2040. It determined that demographic, environmental, economic, and technological developments will shape the contours of the world. In terms of demographic shifts, the NIC report says that these will occur as population growth slows and the world rapidly ages. Some developed and emerging economies in Europe and East Asia will grow older faster and face contracting populations, weighing on productivity and economic growth. The European Commission expects by 2060, Germany's population will shrink by 1/5, and the number of people of working age in the EU's largest economy will fall from 54 million in 2010 to just 36 million in 2060. Across the Pacific, China's labor force has already peaked, and forecasts from the University of Washington predict that China's population will decline from around 1.4 billion today to just 732 million in the year 2100 at the end of the century. On the other hand, the NIC notes that some developing countries in Latin America, South Asia, Middle East, and North Africa are benefiting at present from larger working age populations, which presents the possibility of a demographic dividend if coupled with improvements in education, skills development, and infrastructure. The Southeast Asian countries that make up ASEAN are expected to become the largest economy in Asia outside of China and India by the year 2030, in just a handful of years. The regional bloc currently boasts a population of 675 million people and booming middle classes. Between now and 2040, the population of Nigeria is expected to double to 400 million people to become the largest, that is the most populated country in the world that's not in Asia. The population of Africa, the continent as a whole, will double to 2.5 billion by 2050 and will account for 1/4 of the world's population. Human development, including health, education, and household prosperity, has made historic improvements in every region over the past few decades, but looking forward, many countries will struggle to build on and sustain these successes. Past improvements focused on the basics of health, education, and poverty reduction, but the next levels of development are more difficult to achieve and face headwinds from the pandemic, potentially slower global economic growth, the aging populations I mentioned, and the effects of conflict and climate. Now, these factors will challenge governments seeking to provide the education and infrastructure needed to improve the productivity of their growing urban middle classes in a 21st century economy. And as some countries around the world rise to these challenges, others will fall short. Shifting global demographic trends will almost certainly aggravate disparities in economic opportunity, both within and between countries during the next 2 decades. And this will create more pressure and more disputes over migration. In the environmental space, the physical effects of climate change are likely to intensify over the next 2 decades, especially in the 2030s. More extreme storms, droughts, and floods, melting glaciers and ice caps, and rising sea levels will accompany rising temperatures. And the threat to human life and economic activity posed by climate change has been underscored by recent severe weather events we've seen on our televisions and on the internet. In June and July alone, extreme rainfall and destructive flooding struck Western Europe and central China. North America witnessed its hottest June on record. Unusually damaging monsoon rains fell in India and the Philippines, and serious drought and massive wildfires are again gripping the western part of this continent. Greece is facing a natural disaster of unprecedented proportions as 586 wildfires burn in all corners of the country. These are the events that climate scientists most recently, in the just released report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, warn will become more frequent and severe in the coming decade, and the impact will fall disproportionately on the developing world. Governments, societies, and the private sector are likely to expand adaptation and resilience measures to manage existing threats, but these measures will not be evenly distributed, leaving some populations behind. Global economic trends, again, looking ahead 10, 20 years, will include rising national debt, a more complex and fragmented trading environment, and new employment disruptions. Many governments may find that they have reduced flexibility as they navigate these greater debt burdens, diverse trading rules, and a broader array of powerful state and corporate actors exerting influence. Large platform companies, which provide online markets for huge numbers of buyers and sellers, could drive continued trade globalization and help small firms grow and gain access to international markets, perhaps a positive development that could come about. Now, these powerful firms are likely to exert influence in political and social arenas, leading to a backlash by governments, which will then regulate more. Asian economies appear poised to continue decades of growth through at least 2030, but potentially at a slower pace. Now, technology will offer the potential to mitigate some of the problems I've highlighted, such as climate change and disease, and it will also create new challenges, such as job displacement and worsening cybercrime. Technologies are being invented, used, spread, and then discarded at an ever-increasing speed around the world, and new centers of innovation are emerging. Think here of topics we could spend days on, each of these: 5G, the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence and machine learning, facial recognition technology, 3D printing, and quantum computing. During the next 2 decades, the pace and reach of technological developments are likely to increase ever faster, transforming a whole range of human experiences and capabilities while potentially creating new tensions and disruptions within and between societies, industries, and states. We'll see further digital and biological convergence. Digital technologies and biological systems are beginning to combine and merge in ways that could be profoundly disruptive to our assumptions about society, the economy, and our bodies. We are looking at a future in which humans and machines will not just work side by side, but rather will interact and collaborate with such a degree of intimacy that the distinction between us and them will shrink as we witness more human-computer and brain-machine interfaces. The medical use of digital devices in humans, as well as digitally manipulated insects, such as drone dragonflies and surveillance locusts, are examples of digital technology already being combined with biological entities. The Canadian government is currently studying this area and will produce a report on it in the coming months. Over the next 2 decades, state and non-state rivals will vie for leadership and dominance in science and technology, with potentially cascading risks and implications for economic, military, and societal security. And along these lines, the OECD has envisioned a plausible scenario for the year 2035, just 14 years from now, that features an interconnected virtual platform where the majority of all human interaction for business or leisure takes place. Now, in this scenario of an all-pervading metaverse, technology companies provide the hardware and software, competing to provide customers with new features and experiences. In this vision of the future, states will control what hardware and creative freedoms are made available to their citizens within the virtual universe through regulatory measures, balancing state and security requirements with the desire to be on the cutting edge of technology. Now, if this all sounds like some imaginative science fiction movie, consider how society is already moving into the non-physical world and living at the intersection between the physical and non-physical. Gen Z and the following younger generation, Generation Alpha, are interacting through avatars on Roblox, an online game platform and game creation system. Some children are earning thousands of dollars designing costumes for Roblox characters. Earlier this month, pop singer Ariana Grande performed around a candy-colored series of sets in the online game Fortnite in a multi-day tour that was seen by more than 12 million viewers. And next year, Walt Disney's World Resort in Florida will offer a 2-day immersive experience where visitors will be plunged into a Star Wars story where their decisions and actions, and even their casual conversations, will determine how their personal journey unfolds. A modern 7,000-seat arena designed to facilitate spectator esports events is being built in Toronto on the Canadian National Exhibition grounds. Thousands will gather to watch people, young people, mostly boys, men, on their computers playing games. Consider also the explosion of non-fungible tokens, NFTs. And this is the last thing I want to remark upon in my introductory remarks. So NFTs are units of data stored on blockchain. They certify that a digital asset is unique and therefore not interchangeable. NFTs can be used to represent items like photos or videos, audio, or other types of digital files. Art, music, video sequences, and even collectibles can be bought and sold as NFTs, which are being used to monetize assets and ascribe ownership. Imagine the handwritten autograph you got from a hockey player or another celebrity when you were a kid. All of your friends took a look at it. They may have photocopied it, but the original was yours. And like a certificate of authenticity that a traditional painting comes with, an NFT is the same, but digital. You can expect exponential growth in this space over this decade. Companies like the Montreal startup Oxion, staffed in part by current Concordia University MBAs, are helping clients own digital assets through NFTs. Virtual and augmented reality are increasingly becoming a regular part of our lives. Look at the sales of the Oculus Quest 2 standalone virtual reality headsets produced by a division of Facebook. There will be brands that are created in this metaverse. We may, in fact, be the last generation attached to the physical format. This has profound implications for so many things. On the one hand, it could be a trend that's good for the environment, something to keep in mind as we print less when everything goes digital. Dina, I know that you and our audience have a few questions about our emerging new normal and perhaps developments that are closer at hand than some of the developments I've just talked about in my introduction. So I want to pause here to shift to some issues at the forefront of our minds. Thanks.
Yes, Bart. So you just provided a good overview of the big picture in the longer term. So now my first question is, when we look at the shorter term and what just happened now, how it can impact our lives after the pandemic, which are the industries that suffered the most from COVID-19, and are they likely to remain, change, or disappear?
Well, of course, a lot of companies, including some of which have representatives participating in today's webinar, were hard hit. I would say among those hardest hit have been the travel, transport, and tourism industries. Think of hotels and airlines. Global air traffic has fallen dramatically, and it may not return to prior levels until, say, 2024. Business travel may be even slower to return, and a certain share of that, maybe 20%, may never return. At the same time, as we've seen revenge shopping, people getting out there as shops are open and they can mingle more frequently in public. Many are looking forward to revenge travel and are booking trips for the end of the year and next summer. But other industries that were hard hit, at least in the early months of COVID-19, include auto parts and machinery. I think about people weren't driving much; they were locked down at home. Entertainment and hospitality, theme parks, restaurants, cinemas, professional sports. I mean, a number of Canadian professional sports teams had to relocate to the US and play in empty stadiums. Leisure and recreation, gyms, resorts, dance centers were all affected. The oil and gas industry, as demand fell for petroleum, and of course, the retail sector. So those are among the ones that were particularly hard hit. Now, as far as have any industries disappeared in the last 17 months? It's not so much a case of disappearing as some longer term trends of decline were exacerbated or reinforced. So I cite, for example, the example of travel agencies, newspapers, bookstores, traditional shopping malls, and logging and paper mills. They were all affected during the pandemic, but as part of a bigger, longer term decline, which is likely to continue as we pull out of the pandemic.
So now my second question, on the other hand, which are the industries that actually perform better and what we can learn from them?
I'd say look at the restrictions that government put into place in the province, in Canada, across North America. And there always seemed to be an exception for essential services. So many of those companies working in essential services did booming business. While many companies suffered, individual small businesses especially went out of business or struggled mightily, others were prospering. Those involved directly or indirectly with e-commerce and delivery, like UPS and FedEx, they did booming business. The big tech companies, they all did well. Those involved in COVID testing and vaccination, including distribution of COVID vaccines, they've done well. Gaming and online entertainment, streaming services, do-it-yourself shops, so Home Depot and the like. People took the time when they were at home, working from home, to fix things up, to attend to household projects that had been left sitting unattended, or to take on new ideas and renovations. And home fitness. It was difficult to buy weightlifting equipment during the pandemic, as people started to make use of their homes as a gym, since gyms were closed. Peloton and some of its rivals have thrived during the pandemic.
Yes, so actually you just touched one of the topics I wanted to discuss with you. So you just named the Peloton and how the tech industry is changing the way we consume and e-commerce. So what are actually the new emerging trends and opportunity to pursue?
Well, some of these play into the bigger, longer term trends that I mentioned. So like in the case of demographics, Canada is an aging society. It's not as far along the path as, say, a Japan or Taiwan or South Korea, but it is aging. And in the last year and a half, migration, which has helped to keep that aging in check a little bit. Migration dropped considerably during the pandemic as border restrictions were up. But the big picture is aging. So that relates to a whole number of different specific industries and products, but you will find great opportunities in selling to an older population in Canada and globally. The transition to digital, I alluded to this, and whether or not we achieve some state of metaverse and we're doing more in the non-physical world, substantially more, this is a growth space. So, transfer of files. I think about signatures. We're not signing paper anymore. We're signing online. Anything related to the digital. Prefabricated houses. Okay, this also relates to 3D. They're producing small houses with 3D technology, and there's a housing crisis, particularly for low-income housing in many parts of North America, and you find producers of mini houses and the like taking off in the US and to a lesser extent in Canada, and there's opportunity there. We've also, one of the positive aspects, silver linings of the pandemic is we've become a little bit more sensitive about our environment, about nature, about imbalances between humans and the world we live in. And there's a greater attention to sustainability. And among the implications of this are a increase in meatless food products. And I think we're also going to see more lab-grown food, which over the long term will have an implication for those rearing cattle in Alberta. More and more of our food, this is longer term, will be coming out of laboratories rather than from fields. Just a couple of others real quick. Urban and vertical farming, we started to source a lot more close at hand. People were tending to their gardens and big new construction projects. Some of them are taking into account gardens and vertical farming. Immigration management. So as the pandemic fades, Canada will again allow a lot more migrants than it did this year or last year. And there will be opportunities around that space. Canada will continue to need migration to fill positions in the labor market. And I talked earlier about augmented reality and virtual reality, and there are spin-offs from there affecting all industries basically, and so there'll be huge opportunities there as well.
Yes, and one thing you've been talking about is AI and IT. And my question for you, Bart, is how will IT and AI shape our lives post-COVID?
Well, we've already seen how companies have become much more digitally dependent in pandemic times. It was absolutely essential in order to continue operating and to survive and to thrive. Everything shifted online, including webinars like this, to documentation. So the digital world is, we're not gonna go back to a bunch signing paper where now that we've moved on. And with a globally connected world, we've seen benefits of this and the opportunity for companies to tap into talent in other parts of the world. So the whole technology space will, among other things, expand the ideas of what's the workforce. So I talked a moment ago about how Canada is going to continue to need migration to fill labor market positions. An increasing number of firms are relying in part on labor outside of the country to fill certain holes. So it's not new that there has been offshoring, say to call centers in India and the Philippines, but you can also recruit very skilled labor in the tech industry, software engineers and designers. And you're seeing that kind of pressure in places like Silicon Valley, where due to visa restrictions by the US government, they can't hire as many foreigners as they would like. So in some cases, they're contracting out of the country. And this relates to the trend that we saw during the pandemic, where many people were not just working from home, but they decided that the home was going to be in the countryside or on a beach or in the mountains by a lake, somewhere else, somewhere closer to nature, or just maybe with less congestion, what have you. And in some cases, that's somewhere else, maybe in another country. So that's it, and technology makes that possible to work across international lines. I mean, one could go on and on in technology. That's just a flavor of some of the immediate and most obvious impacts, along with automation, which has picked up pace and will continue to pick up pace.
Yes, absolutely. And you're totally right. So it definitely all the new technology also, and the way we communicate now remotely, just now with Zoom and virtual platforms. We've seen new trends and we're getting used to it, or people are discovering it for the first time, such as telemedicine, even education, and the way we entertain at our own home. You know, during the pandemic, we didn't go to the movies anymore because they were closed. closed, and now, for example, when we want to watch a new movie, we had to turn into platforms such as YouTube or other apps to watch real time the new movies that are coming up, but from the comfort of our home. Also change the way we work, just as we're doing now, and maybe given a lot more opportunities and flexibility for a lot of people. However, one question is, and I would like to hear more about that, is giving the social nature of human and our need for contact. Isn't this conflicting a little bit with the desire to also be able to be free and work remotely and consume digitally? So I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Well, it's certainly a complex space, and companies, employers across Quebec and Canada are trying to figure this out. How is their industry's labor pool? How's that going to work, and what's going to be like in the office? And yeah, many of us kind of miss the human interaction that we experienced as recently of March of last year, and being compelled to stay at home or to only meet in small groups and not to generally avoid the office. It's been hard, particularly on extroverts, right? And people at different stages of their career have different views of this. So it's generally accepted that people will be returning to the office, but it won't be like the before times. There will be different arrangements, and what those arrangements are not completely clear yet, right? It's going to vary by industry. It's going to vary by company. It's going to vary by role. One thing that I found interesting in some survey work that's been done is you might think that younger people who are more tech savvy might be among those who would most want to stay at home, wherever home might be, or just outside the office, because they know how to work their computers and laptops and connect and be productive via the internet and platforms like Zoom, etc. But actually, younger workers, say recent university graduates and those relatively early stage of their career, are less enthusiastic about working full-time remotely. They're more interested in a hybrid model than many more experienced workers who are missing maybe some of that contact, but also have enjoyed the comforts of being at home, of seeing their offspring, of having a different kind of work-life balance. So younger people, what I'm saying is they are more inclined to want to actually return to the office because there they build social capital, they learn about corporate culture, they get feedback from their bosses, and in some cases they have various amenities, whether it's access to a reopened gym or free food or whatever it might be. So younger workers are not necessarily the ones who most want to continue working remotely. And other factors, as I mentioned, like personality, introverts versus extroverts. Introverts some of them have been in heaven to be able to work without having to interact with lots of people all the time, every day.
Absolutely. So another question is, so given a hybrid model, how should companies prepare for that, and how will productivity be affected?
Well, a lot of companies actually have found the working from home outside the office arrangement pretty good for productivity. It has not been a major drag on productivity. At the same time, studies tend to show that with the passage of time, productivity begins to lag, okay? So some companies at the extreme, you have Morgan Stanley that has told all of their employees, come back to the office. Most companies are showing some measure of flexibility. Guy Cormier, the CEO of Desjardins, believes that there won't be a one-size-fits-all arrangement, and I tend to believe that's indeed the case here in Canada. He said that his company will adapt with its staff and be sure that there's a balance between their lives and work. And I think that that's the most, it's not just progressive, it's the most thoughtful perspective to take for company leaders, it's not going to be helpful to your business, to staff morale, to compel everybody to come back to the office. At the same time, you need to communicate effectively and discuss things like boundaries between work and home. Again, a lot is going to depend on the particular role that one plays in a firm and the industry, the expectations in that industry. So it depends. I guess the best response is it depends. And you had asked a moment ago in your last question about the social implications. There are social implications and implications for the office and equality of opportunity. Say, for example, you have more working women preferring to spend time at home. How will that affect their promotion potential if they are not in the office as much as some of their male colleagues who are interacting with the boss and others and making an impression in person? So some of this we won't really have a firm handle on for another year or two as this strange experiment begins to unfold. But it's clear that it's going to be, we're going to see a diverse set of experiences, and we will not all be going back to the office. So companies need to find ways of dealing with the risks of that, including a dispersion of the work culture, and trying to keep everybody on the same page and going in the same direction in terms of the company's mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, you've been also talking in your book and in our discussions too about the 4 days work day. So these are certainly trends we have to look for in a post-pandemic context in the labor market. However, now we're leaning towards maybe another subject that is touches the labor market, but also the general business culture. So what are the changes that we will see in the way we do business and in the work culture and the business culture?
I will address that, Dina. Let me just grab a topic you mentioned briefly there, the 4-day work week. So this hasn't gotten as much attention as the more kind of general hybrid arrangement and how many people go back to the office and when. But this whole disruption of our normal working lives has opened the door to different ways of thinking about work, right? And one of these is the 4-day work week. And it may or may not catch fire. I don't see it being extended anytime soon to all sectors of the economy, but we're going to see more of it. An example is the company Kickstarter, which helps to raise money for startups. Next year, they're going to a 4-day work week. And the idea, although it's getting some traction now, it's been around very quietly in a low-key way. So in Montreal, you have the David Suzuki Foundation, and they've been doing 4-day work weeks since they began operations in the late 1990s. More recently, perhaps inspired in part by pandemic times and new thinking, there's a startup called Expedibox. It's operating in the Eastern Townships in Quebec, and it gives its staff a 32-hour work week with core mandatory hours each day. Now, if you finish your 32 hours by Thursday afternoon, you don't have to come in on Friday. Now, let me segue back to your next question about work culture. It's with what's likely to be some kind of a hybrid arrangement with some workers in the office and some not at any particular time. Leaders are going to be challenged to nurture certain skills and practices that maybe they haven't used as much. Again, trying to maintain a sense of corporate culture and direction and motivation with productivity. There's also during the pandemic, we've seen a greater recognition of mental health issues. We also saw that coincidentally out of the Olympics, where mental health was widely discussed among athletes. But back into the workplace, bosses are going to have to really lean into empathy and understanding their employees better. Keep in mind, if they don't, a lot of employees are not going to stick around. Right now, you see workers having more bargaining power in different sectors than they've had in the past. Wages are rising. You have what's called the Great Resignation, where a number of workers are just leaving their positions. Now, there's different reasons for that. Among them, they're not feeling engaged. So this comes back to what's going to change in the culture and the leadership culture is leaders are going to have to lead a motivated team that is no longer in one place all the time. This pandemic exception is no longer an exception. Yes, it's going to modify and change and morph, but we are going to have people working from multiple places, and how to keep them all engaged and to be in tune with their needs and their state of mind and their well-being. This is going to be a great challenge for leaders. It's going to play into softer skills that they're going to have to really develop, including communications, empathy, emotional intelligence, and the like.
Yes, absolutely. And what, for example, in the way for related to business traveling and the way we used to do meetings and travel to go to meet a client, for example, how will that change? And you know, like now with the pandemic, did the mentalities change? Will people like still continue traveling and moving to meet people in person?
Look, we're going to see for at least the next couple of years lower levels of business travel than we did before the pandemic. Again, as in so many other aspects of the working world after COVID, it's going to depend on roles. So if you're a salesperson and your competitor is getting on the next plane to Vancouver to go meet potential clients who are happy to receive them, you know, as COVID fades, you're going to be potentially at a disadvantage if you're operating just from the office over Zoom for that first all-important contact. So for particular roles, you might see people back on planes and being encouraged by their management, get out there and meet people. And for a lot of workers, they also, you know, they've been missing this contact, this human contact, which helps to build trust and understanding and build long-term productive relationships. But that's not going to be, you know, that's not going to apply to all roles. And many businesses have found an effective way to work remotely, and that will certainly substitute for some travel. It'll be harder, for example, to argue that you need to go to that conference in October in person when a lot of the material could be addressed at lower cost and in a shorter period of time through the internet. So it'll be kind of a tricky finding the sweet spot between, you know, being efficient, making use of technology, and remaining, you know, competitive, and seeing how much travel and actual interaction on the road is necessary to keep your business competitive.
And that's interesting, the way companies will have to find a balance and the way and adjust the way they do business. Actually, if you are on the line and you have questions to ask to Bart, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A box, and we'll be happy to hear some of your concerns and some of the questions you might have. In the meantime, some of my questions for you, Bart, is we have to say that most businesses were totally unprepared for the pandemic and will have never imagined such a thing happening. So how will companies have to adapt and to prepare for such any case scenario like this to be more resilient and prepared? And also, and maybe another question related to that, like what are some changes that we will see in not just on the way they prepare, but will we see also a shift in the global value chains? Will business have to review all that? I'd like to hear a little bit about this.
Okay, there's a few strands there, Dina. Let me start with how businesses can better prepare. I wrote a book earlier this year called Learning from Tomorrow. You've given me the great opportunity to show it to our audience. This is about using strategic foresight to prepare for the next big disruption. And strategic foresight basically is a structured and systematic way of using ideas about the future to better anticipate and prepare for change, to seize opportunities and to build resilience in the face of potential risks down the line. And what I have seen in the past 17, 18 months is an increasing interest in this set of tools, which complements other tools that companies have at their disposal, like forecasting, which is a bit different, or risk management. But in a nutshell, strategic foresight allows you to identify plausible alternative futures. A typical foresight exercise might identify between 3 and 5 alternative futures in the next 10, 15 years. So it's not for next year's programs and sales in a couple of years, but where are the trends taking us? It's not just a straight line extrapolation of what we've seen in the past, but it's using various tools and drawing on expertise of different individuals to see how different forces, drivers of change, are interacting and how they might interact to create a future that we can't envision on the surface today if we only look at historical trends, right? And so I seize upon this because one of the tools of strategic foresight can be adopted by even small companies and other organizations like nonprofits, SMEs, to monitor what is in the air, what are the changes that could be coming that may unleash some big development that would profoundly affect your organization's survival and success. So horizon scanning is a tool that I talk to organizations about adopting, and this is just one of the tools of foresight. And that's basically keeping track of weak signals. Weak signals are possible indications of a new trend, and that could be monitoring social media, that could be looking within your industry and outside your industry at trends that could affect your industry, and monitoring these on a regular basis. And many companies, even big companies, don't do this. Only about 1 in 4 of the Fortune 500 have in-house capacity on strategic foresight, even though you have, in the case of Canada, a number of experts. Some of them are also working in the broader world of futures. And you have a university, OCAD, in Toronto, that teaches as a master's degree and certificates on strategic foresight, teaching tools that can help companies identify where things may go. It's not a prediction, one single prediction. It's not a crystal ball that gives you the exact answers, but it can be very helpful to highlight different possible paths that could affect your business. And on this note, I'll just comment that in 2010, so 11 years ago, the Rockefeller Foundation did a strategic foresight exercise with scenarios about how international development and technology may evolve. And in one of the scenarios, the handful of scenarios they came up with, a global pandemic strikes the world. Governments impose various types of restrictions. China is one of the first countries to come out of this. And you have greater regulation of activity and surveillance by governments. This was a scenario that was identified 11 years ago out of a strategic foresight study. And just to point out, it can be extremely useful. And that's why companies should be doing more of that, starting with horizon scanning, looking for movements and indications of a possible trend that may emerge.
Absolutely. But one question I have for that is what's the difference between how can actually a small company use strategic foresight versus a bigger company that has a lot more budget? Can you talk more about that?
Sure. And obviously, the bigger the budget, the more you can do. But in the case of, say, a small firm, you can dedicate part of one employee's time each day or week to, in a targeted fashion, track certain developments in the industry, and again, more in the broader environment that could affect their progress. There are consultants now. They may not be affordable to a small company, but there are a number of resources online that are free, quality resources or inexpensive that can be drawn upon to develop this kind of monitoring system I'm talking about to anticipate potential change. I see a number of organizations beginning to do this. They're finding it in the wake of the pandemic. The pandemic was a wake-up call. I had cited the Rockefeller study. There were others who anticipated a pandemic. We didn't know exactly when it would hit, but we knew we would have one. And the same could be said about other risks. We know there's going to be more hacking and cybercrime. We know about, say, aging and other demographic trends and technological change. Daily scanning or weekly scanning can help you refine that a bit to see with a little bit of additional analysis where that could lead in the years ahead to help you with your planning and strategies even in the shorter term. But yes, resources can help a bigger company do more, but it doesn't mean that a smaller company, a business owner operating a sole proprietorship can incorporate some futures thinking in their day-to-day work and life.
That's interesting. And I think also you mentioned some resources. So I think that will be actually interesting that if we can share this to the public, to our attendees.
Sure.
After the webinar. So maybe a more of a close-up question. So what can we learn from what just happened in a business point of view, and what are the things we should learn from that?
Well, this experience, I think, points to another skill or another aspect of business culture that needs to change in a more widespread fashion. And that's developing greater agility and flexibility in the minds of decision makers, leaders in companies. So a lot of companies manage to survive, and some even thrive in these very difficult circumstances if they were ready to shift. Think of restaurants that were on the cutting edge of moving to delivery services. So they had to close their restaurant, and some painful decisions may have had to been made about laying off workers. Although fortunately there was some government support that mitigated that a bit, right? But those that saw the opportunity to feed people still needed food, right? They just couldn't come sit in your restaurant. So those that made that switch, so being poised and ready for a sharp switch in practice. You're still in the same business of selling food. It's not changing careers or direction. It's just how you do it. And coming back to my remarks at the outset, we are living in a time of increasing change and volatility and uncertainty. So companies, even small companies, need to be poised to change in a quicker time frame than in the past, in order to, in some cases, in order to survive, but also sometimes to seize opportunities that may have been unmanageable not long before.
Absolutely. And I think, as you say, so flexibility and being aware of the trends that are happening, listen to the industry trends and to your workforce, your employee, maybe this would be the key to overcome the pandemic and the next months to come in a post-pandemic world. So actually, it's really an interesting discussion. I'd like to thank you, Bart, for your time and for covering all these topics with us and providing all these insights. It was really a pleasure having you.
Dina, it was my pleasure. It was really enjoyable to speak with an audience of leading figures in local business in Montreal and government officials, and of course to have our exchange today. So thank you so much. And I will share some details about the book that might be useful to some companies thinking about strategic foresight in their context, and some other resources that could be useful for those who have attended today.
Absolutely. And for our attendees here today, just wanted to point out that this session is recorded. So if you never ever want to forward it to some of your friends or colleagues, it should be available on our website as well as our YouTube page within the next days. And of course, you will receive a follow-up email with more details tomorrow. And I'd like to ask everyone, so once you quit, you will be automatically directed to a satisfaction survey. We'd really like to hear from you, so would be really appreciate if you can take 1 minute to just answer. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you again, Bart. It was really a pleasure to animate this discussion, and I wish you all have a good day and hope to see you in your next event.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.